Now, with the rapid proliferation of virtual schools, the Department of Education is in urgent consultation with online schools to finalise the virtual schools framework, this to address the policy vacuum in the virtual education space. The National Alliance of Independent Schools Associations says that the new framework is necessary to provide policy direction in the establishment, registration and regulation of these schools to ensure that they operate legally. The association has emphasised the need for a legal opinion on the definition of a virtual school. It says that this should include a policy framework on registration of the schools, qualifications to be offered, and accreditation and quality assurance. The framework document will assist to provide direction about registering schools and provide the quality standards by which the virtual schools will be monitored to consistently provide quality, effective education. The main principle guiding the legal brief is that virtual schools should strengthen and align with the current system and contribute towards national goals of quality education for all. Well, to discuss this, we're now joined by the founder, Chief Executive Officer of Boston Online Homeschool, Ari Katz. Ari, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Good evening, Peter. How are you?
Yeah, always good to talk to you. So COVID-19 has certainly been a major disruptor. Online education is not new, but it has proliferated. And with that, what problems have you seen that need addressing?
So I think, as you mentioned, the online environment is not new, but there is a huge proliferation within the education space. And of course, on the negative side, any teacher that's got a laptop and an internet connection has suddenly formulated an online school out of their garage. And of course, this is going to need two things. First of all, it's going to need a discerning consumer to understand what he or she is looking for if one chooses to go the online route. But more importantly, it's also going to call on government to actually provide a regulated environment for online, either online homeschooling or online home education support, whichever way one wants to go and whichever way one wants to look at it. Those are the negatives. But on the positives, there are a huge number of positives available to learners in the online environment. So, for example, for the first time, we can actually harness personalized learning. We can map a learning path based on the students' performance, based on their strengths, their weaknesses, and we can tailor the assessments to the needs of the learner. And as the learner progresses, we can obviously make the assessments more difficult and raise the level. So there are many advantages, and there's a lot of technology out there, not only in South Africa, but internationally, using the latest technology of things like artificial intelligence, adaptive learning, all those resources which can add value to the entire teaching and learning process.
The benefits are there for sure. I'm just curious that up until now, has there been no regulation in the online space just because there weren't that many, or what's been the situation?
So up until now, there isn't really a process for online schools to actually register. There are frameworks for home education, and the policy framework really states that a parent can provide home education to their student, to their child, provided that the home education is at least of the standard that is available had the child gone to a regular school. Now, the question really is how of their child, if they want to home educate their child, and they would either have to have the skills themselves or they would have to rely on resources that are out there in the market. And obviously, the internet has provided a huge amount of resources available to parents. The problem really is that it isn't necessarily available in a structured format. And where we see an opportunity is to provide parents and home educators with the infrastructure and the resources to enable them to access the highest quality of teaching and learning and the highest quality of assessments. And in fact, I think this is an opportunity to democratize education. So whereas previously the best of education might only have been available in the most expensive private schools, this, through the technology, is an opportunity to make those resources available to the entire country. Of course, in South Africa, we have the problem of access to data, and that data is expensive, and we still need to solve that problem. But if we solve that problem, then actually we have an opportunity to democratize education and make the best resources and the best teaching and learning available to the mass market.
All right. I mean, the positives, as you keep on saying, really do point to a good journey ahead. But as you said before, there is another side. And I'm just wondering, how do you even define a virtual school? And is this limited to basic education because the child must be in a school, whether a formal physical system or, as you say, home education? And if that's the case, what about people outside the basic education system? Will there be regulations for them? What's your understanding?
So my understanding initially is that the government is attempting to provide a framework where online schools will be able to be registered and provide minimum guidelines to regulating that environment. So one of the things that I think that is encouraging with the paper that's been put out is it talks to certain basic requirements. For example, it talks to the necessity to have qualified teachers and educators employed in the environment. So it's not just a question of setting up technology and a couple of robots and bots to answer FAQs. But in fact, you'll have to have an entire environment that's properly staffed and equipped with the necessary manpower and educators and qualifications to provide that. So it's one of the positives that I see with the proposed regulations. The other issue is it talks about having centers where you'd be able to provide support. Now, I think in South African context, that's particularly important because, as I mentioned previously, access to data and technology is a limitation in the country, and therefore almost forcing online environments to provide more than just the technology, but also providing environments where learners will be able to go and get admin support and maybe technology and access to data, I think are going to be positives. And so I think that if the regulations are implemented correctly, I think there are a number of challenges. As you mentioned, what is a virtual school? What is an online school? How does it differentiate itself from a physical school? And so there are a number of challenges and discussions that will have to take place over a period of time. But at least we're starting the journey. And I think that's a positive. And I think kudos to the government that they've recognized that there is a new world out there. And instead of trying to shut it down, they're embracing it by trying to formulate regulations and a framework within which we can harness these resources. So I don't think that we'll solve the problems overnight, but we do need to start the journey.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a great idea because I guess if you can get some kind of certification, it gives parents an assurance that the school that they're registering with has been recognized and tested by the authorities, that it is able to provide a quality education. So that's great. But let me ask about, I remember when my daughter was in high school, we had a tutor for her that would come after school, spend time with her. A lot of this has gone online. Where will they fall into this system? Will they have to be registered? Will they have to be monitored and so on and so forth?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's unclear from the paper as to where this will start and where this will finish. My understanding from reading of the paper is that it's speaking about online schools, whereas what you're speaking about is really people who provide support services to home education, right, whether it be the home education as the primary source or the home education really as an extra lesson basis really.
Right.
But I think if you may think about the extra lesson market that you just mentioned, currently to get a tutor to come to your daughter, to your house, is an expensive process. And if we can use the technology to do that, as I said before, I think it's an opportunity to further democratize education. we are of the view that we think that the need really is more about providing home education support, i.e. either to the parents or to the learners or both, but it doesn't abdicate for the parent the responsibility to take responsibility for their child if you're in the home education environment.
All right. The other challenge, of course, with any legislation online is what if I'm in Australia and I know the South African education system and I set up a school there? No one's going to regulate me from there.
Well, so that actually is going to be a challenge. And there, I think the challenge is really going to be to educate our consumers or educate the public as to what are the things to look out for so that we land up with a discerning consumer. In fact, that might not be a bad thing, because we might very well find that there are providers on an international scale that can provide education, whether it be in the form of Cambridge or the American system or the Australian system or whatever it may be, and learners will be able to take advantage of quality education provided by international providers. And I personally think that is a good thing, because anything that adds to the quality of teaching and learning can only benefit our country. And what might happen is you might even find an international provider who can provide education in a sphere that you might not be able to obtain education in South Africa. It might be, whether it be music or religious studies or whatever it may be. So I think we need to also recognize that we're part of a global village. And when you're part of a global village, you cannot shut out the rest of the village. And it's important to teach both parents and learners how to actually harness the resources of the global village. Because ultimately, if we become part of the global village, that will also help us to actually solve our long-term unemployment problem.
Okay, so these rules and regulations will take a bit of time to sort out and get them legislated. In the meantime, what sort of checklist would you give parents if they want to test whether this institution is up for, is credible and can be trusted? What sort of things should parents be looking at to say, okay, I'm safe here with Boston, I'm safe here with this institution?
Okay, so that's a great question, Peter. I think some of the indicators that they should be looking out for is, number one, I think they should be looking at who is behind the institute, the offering. So is it a credible institution? Do they have experience in teaching and learning? That, I think, is the starting point. Who's behind it? What's the reputation? Do they have experience in teaching and learning? The next thing is to understand is, what is the level of support? And I think one should ask the question, is it, for example, only asynchronous lessons that you're going to log on and just have to study on your own time, own pace, with no guidance? Or, on the other hand, what is the level of support that the institution will provide? Will there be access to possibly some live lectures? Will there be access to tutors if I have a problem? Who will mark my assessments? What feedback will I get? So I think it's very important for consumers to actually ask these questions. And as you say, the checklist. So the checklist should be, number one, what's the reputation? Who are the people behind it? What's the experience? Number two, what's the offering? Does the offering entail the degree of support that I'm going to need? Number three, which I think is very important, is, does the system provide for parental login? In other words, many of these systems, certainly ours does, where we encourage the parent to actually log in and actually see what the learner's progress is, and engage with the educators and understand where my child is actually holding in the process and what remedial action should be taken. So I think the level of engagement of the parent is very important. Then I think the next question to really ask is, what is the technology that I'm going to need to support this? Do I need a regular PC? Do I need an Apple Mac? What's the level of technology that I'm going to need so that I can decide if it's in my budget? And talking about budget, I think the next question is, what is the total cost? And here we have to be careful of all the hidden costs. So who's going to provide textbooks? Is my child still going to get textbooks? Who's going to provide for the examinations? Do I have to pay extra for the examinations? Are they local examinations? Are they external examinations? So in our environment, for example, we're providing content and technology that is supporting the Cambridge system, and we're including the textbooks and the teaching and the learning and the content, but we're not including the examinations, for example, because that's with Cambridge directly, and you register directly with Cambridge. But it's important that the parent understands all the costs that are involved. So in summary, it's the institution. Who are they? What's their experience in teaching and learning? Secondly, it's the offering in terms of where does it start, where does it finish, and what's the level of support that I'm going to get. Number three, the parental involvement, the parental login. How am I going to be informed? And number four, the total cost implications of all of this.
Ari Katz.
So I think those are probably, I mean, there are many others, but I think those are probably the four most important. You know, one can go on and talk about the degree of technology. Does it use artificial intelligence? So, for example, we've got a predictive tool involved which will predict how you're performing and whether you're going to make the exam or you're not going to make the exam. There's automatic triggers to the parent. Does it to send the parent a report how the child is actually doing? Then we built in adaptive learning. You start at a certain level and you move your way up. But those are all technology features that one can unpack at a later stage. But I think the first four questions are the most important to get you on the road.
Ari Katz, always a pleasure talking to you. Where were you when I was in high school? My school experience probably would have been so much easier. Thanks so much.
Well, I think we would have needed the technology, Peter, so we were a little bit out of town.
Yeah, we're still using slide rules. I bet lots of kids don't even know what that is. Thanks so much, Ari.
Yeah, absolutely. Be well, Peter.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Thanks. That's Ari Katz, who's the CEO of Boston Online Homeschool, talking to us about the deployment of online learning. It's proliferated, but that means we probably need some rules and regulations to make sure that you're getting to credible and reliable institutions. You're watching The Globe. Coming up after the break, we're going to be taking a look back at the year that was in terms of trying to deal with gender-based violence and perhaps some of the gains and the challenges that still need to be dealt with. Stay with us for that.